there we go. This focus on diversity and racism has created a bit of a minefield of opportunities for us to put our feet in our mouth at the very least, or be completely offensive and inflammatory at the worst. And if you're like me, someone who doesn't really like confrontation, someone who doesn't really like to be uncomfortable, you might just be tempted to sit this one out. You might be like me, kind of scared or even discouraged to talk about it and engage because you might just feel so out of touch. If that's you, and I know it's me, then today's session is for us. I strongly believe that this is a movement that we simply shouldn't ignore, but rather as business owners and HR professionals, leaders in our organizations, we need to champion diversity and inclusion and work hard to create an anti-racist organization. I've so appreciated my team here at Hillcrest. We've had so many great talks around the lunch table or as we're all walking or traveling around racism and inclusion. And the one thing that I can say is that they've all just given each other just so much grace and have really allowed for a safe place for us to talk about things, to ask our questions, and to just gently guide each other through some of these tougher discussions. And my hope for today's session is that we here, even on Zoom, can provide that environment for each other. It's going to be an interesting conversation, and I would just encourage you to come at it with an open mind and just be incredibly gracious as you might be further along in this journey as some of the other people on the call. So as always, but maybe even more so today, let's just be patient and kind with each other as we unpack this topic. So our seminar today is on building an anti-racist organization. Just a reminder, it is being recorded. And also, everybody's on mute right now, which is great. But if for some reason we start to get some flashes from your box, we will mute you, and don't be offended if we do that. But do feel free to ask questions. And we can kind of do that in one of two ways. I think we've got enough people on the call now that we should probably just use the chat function. So type your questions into the chat. Jillian's going to be watching for that and feed the questions and comments through to the speakers. So it's my real pleasure now to introduce Michelle Berg and Shuana Porter. First of all, Shuana, thanks for being here. Shuana is the founder, activist, philanthropist, and an all-around good guy. She is a first-generation immigrant from Jamaica who has always aspired to make people feel good about themselves. She aspires to create change in her community by empowering people to build brand equity by developing themselves from the inside out. She holds a business management degree with a major in organizational behavior and a minor in social responsibility. Her career has allowed her to establish over 10 years of management and leadership experience with 6 years of image branding and business consultancy. Michelle Berg is the leading lady and chief executive officer at Elevated HR Solutions. This is Michelle's third appearance on the Hillcrest Zoom seminar series, and we're just so grateful for her wisdom, vulnerability, and just willingness to share. Elevated is an organization that helps attract, develop, and retain top talent by designing workplace strategies and programs so that employees and employers can thrive. And we also work with Elevated and are just so grateful for it. Michelle has taken the approach that she can't advise companies on how to build strong cultures unless she's doing it herself. Many of the stories and ideas that she has have been generated from failed attempts and ultimate successes right at her own company, which she regularly uses as an incubator for new and novel ideas. So Shuana and Michelle, welcome to the Hillcrest Zoom series. We look forward to your discussion today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us again, Dave. It certainly means a lot, and your continued support of Elevated is certainly appreciated. Today is definitely going to be a good conversation. And I have to say, Dave, the fact that you've even started this and you've built this platform and given everyone this opportunity to ask questions, to be vulnerable in this as well, I just hope more and more organizations continue to follow your lead. So thank you. Thank you for just having the conversation. We do have a presentation today, because one of the things you will certainly see, Shuana, I'm sure you're going to agree, is when you and I start talking, we can go all over the map. What we usually think is going to be an hour conversation, what was it the other day? We were in our office for 6 hours straight and didn't even realize.
It was 8 hours.
So this is what we do. So we've got ourselves a presentation here that we're just going to follow. And for those of you that are here as well, I just want to start off by saying you asked some really great questions that I'm excited to go down. I know that sometimes asking questions around this topic in particular can be difficult. And so we really appreciate that, again, even from an anonymous perspective, that we're going to be able to go down this path. As you know as well, from and most of you all know this because is noted in the survey, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a massive topic. And even for us, we've created multiple layers of modules that we support organizations with. Today, we are focusing specifically on a very small, a very important piece, but on anti-racism specifically in organizations. We are attempting to answer all your questions today that you did, that were asked. But again, we aren't looking at the full scope of DEI work. We are just looking specifically at the anti-racism organization. So with that being said, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So today's agenda is just a recognition again that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and yet even then there is no finish line. As this work goes, this is a continuous journey, and for me, doing the work really, while I would have always said, you know, this is where I am. I'm certainly not a racist. I would have definitely had those opinions and thoughts. It has been a journey, and it's one that I am super excited that Shuana has joined me on and has supported me through as well. But it's been a lot of work on my own, and there is by no means do I ever feel that I'm going to be finished. And I know that during this, you know, I have to be prepared to make mistakes and commit to pivoting. And as long as we are all there and show each other some grace during this learning and unlearning and showing understanding, I think we can all move that pendulum forward. So today's agenda, it really became clear that probably we just needed to start off with some basic understanding of definitions. Shuana is probably one of the best storytellers that I have ever come across. And so I'm excited that when we talk about these definitions, she'll speak to her lived experience as well. And then we're going to go through, I call this a choose your own adventure, because realistically, this whole presentation today has been fully customized based on your questions and the questions that were asked in the survey. Dave already did an awesome introduction, but what I do want to also just add to all of that is our partnership began in July, when, again, as I was saying, the recognition that I needed to speak beyond my own lived experience, that if we were really going to make an impact, I needed someone like Shuana on the team and to support. And so what's really cool about what Shuana does in a lot of ways too is we will go in, we'll either help set up committees, we'll talk about those committees. Shuana has been used as a support, as a mediator. When I have done investigations and we have recognized that, you know, there were certainly some issues, Shuana has actually come in and helped facilitated real and impactful change in just a short amount of time. But so these are all options that we've really, while we do this and we have these conversations, the real work is within the organization, supporting them side by side. Shuana, did you want to say anything else about yourself that Dave didn't already cover before we just jump right in?
I thank you, Dave, for the awesome bio and introduction. It's something that I still like. It's the funniest thing when I hear people introduce me. So thank you for that. It was hilarious and very kind of you to say all those nice things. I think overall, as a person that wears many hats, from, you know, being a businesswoman to being an activist to just being a Black woman and being an immigrant, I look at a lot of things from a pivoting lens. And I think having all of those experiences, knowing being the employer and have been the employee, have been in position where I can help someone or been in the position where I was the oppressed. When I go into organization, like Dave said, few times while he was talking about is leading with grace. I think there's a difference and a delicate balance between leading with grace, but then still holding real accountability for change. So I think that's something that I've been able in my 29 years to really, I would like to say not master, but come to a really good understanding of how to meet people where they're at. And to, while I'm meeting them where they're at, extending grace, but then holding them at that firm accountability where I'm not here to beat you down. I'm here to build you up. But in building you up, I'm going to show you grace, but I'm also going to hold you to that truth and reconciliation. So I think if I was supposed to add anything else that I've recognized that is my strong suit as an individual, both personal or professional, that's what that would be. Also, thank you guys, everyone, for having me here, and I look forward to the rest of this meeting. See where we go at the end, this journey we're going on.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So just a real quick recap of the survey. We ended up having 30 responses to the survey. 4 were sure that they had diversity, equity, and inclusivity policies or similar. The rest of the answers, meaning 26 that were left, either said they were unsure or didn't know. 3 individuals felt that their organization had a solid program at work right now as it related to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. 2 of the organizations actually have a committee in place. 4 came from organizations with conscious DEI hiring practices, meaning they understood how that worked, what they needed to do to operate. And 6 felt comfortable supporting DEI initiatives. So with that being said, out of 30 respondents who either said unsure or no, clearly even just this and the data that we've got, there is work to be done. But I think at the same time, I am so happy again that all of you are here to join us to have this conversation. So, Shu, should we get in it? We're going to go through some definitions first. There we go. Definitions. So, fragility. Shu, you wanna begin? You wanna kick us off today, or fragility?
Fragility.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very what should I say? It is a very tender definition that a lot of people struggle with what fragility is. And I think because most times when we talk about or we think about fragility, it feels like it's an attack on our character. You know, when you tell a white person you're being fragile, especially as a man, it feels attacking from every aspect you could think of. But what I want people to understand with fragility is it's the discomfort, like the slide said, the discomfort and defensiveness on a part of a person who has privilege. So if I'm bringing to you a social justice issue and I'm telling you whether you have implicit or explicit responsibility or your consciousness or subconscious biases, and your first thing is to say that no, I don't have any, and then you're defensive, you shut down the conversation, you are automatically saying there's nothing wrong for me to work on, there's nothing that someone could tell me, and then it comes from a place of it's now adding anger, or you want to react by, you want to, you know, diminish or discredit the person. If when someone holds up a mirror to you and your first reaction is to be angry, that's coming from a place of fragility, is that you cannot take any type of conversation or feedback. So it's something that's what that means. I think it doesn't mean that you're sensitive or you're soft or you know, as oftentimes how it's used. It just means your level of defensiveness, more so than even discomfort, talking about things that are very necessary to talk about.
Yeah, for me, actually, where this, if you want a great book about specifically around white fragility by Robin DiAngelo, it was really enlightening, even for me on my, for me on my journey through all of this as well, where I was encouraged to ask the questions about my reactions. And another one, you know, and that's what we do a lot. You know, I asked Shu when she and I are working together, I have to come at it from a place of tell me more, or I want to learn more. And I recognize that those feelings are still there. The defensiveness or the wait a second, I'm not racist. Like those are the things that I want to say. But when I sit there and I go, tell me more, I want to learn more, and I want to listen, that's the major difference. But getting defensive right out of the gate, we see this a lot. We see this, I mean, Shu, you see this all the time when you're doing your facilitations as well. And so it's really putting that into check, especially if we want to learn here. The next thing then, we're going to talk about privilege. And we, you know, W/O, Shu, why do we do it like that?
So I've kind of coined over these last couple of months, you know, typically when we talk about W standing white, so looking at white privilege and understanding what is white privilege. And we just kind of simplify as being given something without having to ask for it. And I'm going to explain it a little bit more and come back to that definition once we look at what racism is, because you will understand the building of privilege through understanding the lens of racism. The O now stands for oppression, oppressor's privilege. And the reason why I call it oppressor's privilege and just not white privilege, because individuals who are non-Black and falls on a spectrum of white passing meanings having the right of passage, the more white features you have, or the further you are from my complexion on a spectrum of colorism, is the more the community, society is built up for you to succeed. And the more you look like me, the darker you get, whether you're Black or in any race that you're in, the darker you are, is the more you are considered of a less of a human being and more of a cargo. So privilege is fault on a spectrum from being at the base to being at the bottom. It's on the top and the bottom. And this is oftentimes shown through the word. This is why I am anti using the word POC or BIPOC, because these are the two terms who really push this agenda of base and bottom. And the reason why I say that, to give you a historical fact like I like to do, the word color stemmed from the word colored. And when we look back in the 1950s during the time of segregation and Jim Crow law, where it was white schools versus colored schools, white buses versus colored buses, white water fountains versus colored water fountains, it was a white versus Black. And then when immigration became very popular in North America, and you had the Asian community and the Indian community and everybody from all over the world start populating North America, it became people of color. So it went from being colored, meaning Black people. It is a politically correct word for the word Negro. We know what the politically correct word for the word, the other word that is Negro is a politically correct word for. So it really is stemmed and built in a racialized idea that as a colored person, I am also that's the nice way of saying Negro. And we know Negro is a nice way of saying, you know, nigger. So that was the building of that word. So then when you take colored, and which was singular, and then make it into plural, people of color, that is our society saying white being the base and everybody else being an other. Because if you ask yourself, what is the abbreviation for white? There is absolutely none. That was not just done out of accident, that was strategically done. And then when we now look at the word BIPOC, especially blew up this year while the marching and the protesting for the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, the word was coined now to say, to pull out the B and the I in Canada, because this is a word that is only used in Canada. It is not used across North America very frequently. And the B and I meaning Black and Indigenous. So that again is someone who decide that they, you know, wanted to just create words, decided that BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, and then people of color. And what that was to do was to show that Black and Indigenous people are the most disproportionately treated out of every racialized group. That wasn't, again, to give us power or to empower us. That is to show us how disenfranchised Black and Indigenous people are. And yet again, we are the base, the white race is the base, and everybody else is the other, and Black being the most disenfranchised. So it is the recognition of struggle. So none of these terms are actually helpful. They're actually more harmful than we think it is. And it actually creates also collectivism in the sense of, when you have a problem, what Black people across their intersectionalities and across the communities face is different from what Indigenous across their communities and across their intersectionalities versus the Asian community, whether you're Chinese, you're Japanese, like so many other different countries, you know, different from Indian, whether you're from Pakistan or you're from India, there's so many different intersectionalities, cultures, religion, creeds to observe. When you put us all into that collective group, you're basically saying you could create one solid solution to fix everything. And that is the furthest from the truth. So I do not use the word POC. I do not use the word BIPOC because I think it's highly insultive. And I think we didn't do any research. The communities that these words was meant to help was not consulted while creating these words. These words just was created and told, this is what we use. It's politically correct and it's actually very harmful. So this is where we look at what privilege is. Privilege is being able to do these things, to just create and to make something and then say, here, do it. And there's no question around it. Privilege is being able to live a life fruitful without having to think, am I going to be able to be discredited because of my color? Privilege is given the opportunities and the resources to your children, to yourself, because the society and the system and policies and procedures were made to uplift and to empower you. That is what privilege is. And privilege is looked as at a spectrum, and that's why we have white privilege, and then we have an overall oppressor's privilege, because individuals who are not Black can partake in privilege as well because they have white passing features.
Thanks. Oh man, every time you go through that with me, there's just even more recognition, even more understanding. And that was the first meeting that Shu and I had. Was she said to me, do you use BIPOC? And I said, well, yes, everybody's using BIPOC right now. Like, that's all you read. And even, you know, Black writers are using BIPOC. And when she went through that with me, that the aha moment again is that creating that divide. You know, there was that guilt and there was that shame. And that one of the things, I was listening to another speaker the other day, I recognized that guilt and that shame was an indulgence and doesn't help anything either. So it was learning, acceptance, and then moving on. As it relates to power, for me, I am often reminded of the power that I have, specifically being in human resources, sitting in multitudes of meetings as it relates to performance management. You know, I know when people are going to be hired. I know what people are paid. I know when people are going to be fired. And so I have this power, and I used to always say, no, I don't. You know, I'm not the decision maker. There's no such thing as power. And recognizing it now in the instance of race and how it can negatively affect others in the organization, there's a higher awareness now that's required, because I do in a way get to access, you know, decide who gets to access those resources. I do influence. When I do speak, I am heard. And so now I have to make choices around the power that I have. I have to recognize it. I have to be conscious about recognizing what that power is, and then how I'm using it, and for what purpose and what reason. And we can use power for good, but we can certainly, and we have seen through history of time, that we can use power for basically evil. And so recognizing it when we're having these conversations is probably one of the most important steps, because then we can start to look at different ways of doing things. Shu, do you have anything you want to add about power?
Muting my mic because I didn't want to have any frequency, but no, I think you've articulate that very well, and I think that's exactly what power is understanding where you are on that spectrum, how many power you have, and even as a person who, like I said, consider themselves as a person of color, which I don't like, because just said I don't like using that term, racialized group, let's say, understanding your own power when that you are sometimes put in a position to be both the oppressed and the oppressor. Mm-hmm. So being very, very conscious of that power and that privilege and that fragility when you're told these things, because they all melt into each other.
Yeah. Which really now leads us into unconscious bias. And we have bias even when we don't think we do. And I think these are the number one struggles that Shu and I face when we're having conversations with people, is just how unconscious we live our lives, how unconscious we are about language choices that we make, how unconscious we are about stereotypes that have been formed, well before us. Shu has often said, and I'll let you speak to it, Shu, but you often say, we didn't create, no one here in this age created racism. These were constructs that were created well before us, but those constructs still impact how we think, how we feel, how we operate today. And that's, and again, the awareness, right, Shu, is key to all of this.
Well, like I tell everybody, I said, nobody here, or people, your mothers or your grandmothers or even your great grandmothers probably did not create racism, but it is perpetuated through your mothers and your grandmothers and your systems and your TVs and your medias, and it's all perpetuated to this day. And what unconscious bias, and this is my favorite visual to put in your head. Think of the world as a hamster wheel, right? And it's just going. You're just born into this system that is already going, that's already running, that's already going. And as a child, from before birth, the things that your mother watched and the things that your mother listened to, that was seeped into you, that it's all in there, micro placed in there through systems, it's all strategic. Like I said, even looking at the word BIPOC and POC, it's a strategic thing that if you're not conscious of really sitting down to analyze it, you will not find it problematic. This is what systemic racism is. If you don't sit down to actually stare at it and try to go over it with a fine-tooth comb, your first glance would be like, what's the problem? So like what Dave said earlier, when he said something, or somebody said something at the table, and his kid said, "Dad, we don't say that." And you're like, what word? This is what unconscious bias is. You don't even understand the level of harm or hatred or racism that you're perpetuating, because it wasn't meant for you to understand. It wasn't meant for you to discover. It wasn't meant for you to realize. This is how the base and the other was supposed to be kept, by not realizing that there is this large gap and this large difference. So when people start talking about it and start talking about the large gap and start talking about the privilege and start talking about the fragility and the power, it was supposed to make you angry. It was supposed to make you shut down. It was supposed to make you reserve back into yourself, because your whole character as a person is now being questioned from an explicit place, where a lot of your bias is coming from an implicit place. And that's why we have these friction and these can't come to the table moment, because it's something that you're not even supposed to recognize that you're doing, but you're very much so doing that.
Which actually brings us to the next definition. It's not enough to simply not be racist and to say, hey, I'm not racist. What's important is that we need to be anti-racist. And anti-racist is about a journey and agreeing that you're never done. You're never done learning. You're never done the journey that we're on. It is that active state of mind. And how can we identify these processes, these systems that are in place, and change them?
Yeah.
You oppose racism.
And just like anti-racism is the same thing as looking at what allyship is, right? There's no such thing as a anti-racist coach. If you ever hear someone referring to themselves as an anti-racist coach, be wary. And let me tell you why I say that. Anti-racism and allyship is not a 10-step program. I cannot teach you how to be anti-racist. I cannot teach you how to be an ally. And you do not get a certificate at the end of the session. You do not get to say, yay, I am now not racist. That's not how this works. Anti-racism and allyship is a lifestyle. It is something you have to get up every morning. Just like how you get up every morning and you decide, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to shower, I'm going to eat today. You have to make a conscious decision that you are going to be anti-racist and be an ally to something and someone. Allyship is specific and it's intentional that you must put your life and your livelihood behind. That is how specific allyship is. You cannot be an ally to everyone. You cannot be an ally to everything. You have to decide, what is it that I want to fight? What social injustice I want to fight alongside with somebody that is not having the opportunity or have the power or have the resources that I have. And I'm going to put my life and my livelihood, my resources behind it. That is what anti-racism is, because we have both implicit and explicit biases when it comes to racialized people. You will constantly come to a newer learning and unlearning place. You will constantly make mistakes. You will constantly catch yourself saying or doing something that you're not intentionally trying to perpetuate. But if you've lived your 40, 50, 60, 30, 20, however long years, believing that this is right, and then now you have to basically deconstruct yourself and reconstruct yourself, it is not going to happen overnight. So because that's not going to happen in a year, in a month, in a week, anti-racism is not something that can just be a one-off conversation, a one-off session, a one-off meeting, a one-off contract. It has to be something that is looked as a part of the organizational behavior and culture and lifestyle. As long as your organization is moving and thriving, anti-racism has to be a part of it from a personal and professional perspective. So that's what I want you to understand, what anti-racism is and being pro-allyship is.
So we're going to have a good conversation, I can guarantee you right now, around microaggressions. But microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, or, whether they're intentional or unintentional. At the end of the day, what they do is they communicate hostile, derogatory, negative attitudes towards stigmatized groups. And when Shu and I first started having conversations around microaggressions as well, we are all hearing this word. This has been, and in the workplace, microaggressions is coming up over and over again. Whether or not it's something like, oh, you're gay, you should meet my friend, she's gay too. Or, even just asking questions around wanting to touch your hair, things like that are, or you're really well-spoken. Considering you're Black, you're really well-spoken. That comes out. I hear that all the time. I
used to get it all the time, being born and raised in Jamaica. Like now to this day, I've still lived longer in Jamaica than I've lived in Canada. And I also lived in the States, but still I've lived in Jamaica most of my life thus far. And, my country being a developing country, like, for example, it was like, oh, isn't Jamaica like a third world country? That's one thing. Or, you guys speak English down there? Yes, we actually speak the Queen's English. We speak British. Our schools are all British speaking schools. We learned how to write and speak English. Or, what did I hear when you just moved here? Do you guys have houses and electricity, or do you guys? And there is literally people asking, like, or do you guys have like huts, like cool huts, and do you live on the beach, and do you just like chill out every day? And it's like, No, ma'am, sorry. So these are some things that are considered microaggressions.
But as you and I were talking, and you go through this every single day, you have something said to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that micro? What's micro about that? And is that an aggression, or does it eventually become just aggressive?
It's
I
just
can't imagine calling me out like asking questions like this every single day.
where you're from. The
Yeah.
minute you see someone that is Black, you automatically disassociate them from Canada. You displace them. There's no way you can be Canadian. You must be an immigrant. Your great grandfather could have not inhabit this land. You must have just arrived here from Nigeria. That is a lot of the time when you see Black people, you automatically believe they're not from here. There's no way they're Canadian. If I see a white individual, my first question isn't, where are you from? Are you Scottish? Are you I just assume you are Canadian. But when a lot of times when you see Black people, you assume, where are you from? Even if you were born here, there's no way your mother was born here. And even if your mother was born here, even there's no way you're like, it blows people's mind to think that Black people are just as much as Canadian, if not, in fact, some Black ancestors have been here longer than even your ancestors. It's like, that's not even a thing. Like, what? No way. It can't be a thing. So in that case, it's no longer, there's nothing micro about aggressions, I believe. There's no such thing as microaggressions. It's either it's aggressive or not.
Right. But it lends itself back to that unconscious bias again. It's understanding and stop operating from an unconscious perspective and get conscious about language choices, questions that we're asking. If it's truly to understand and you're trying to inform yourself and be educated, okay, but ask yourself, what matter does it actually even have? Why do you need to even go down that conversation in the first place? And then our last definition before we jump into your questions today are all around gaslighting. And Shu and I have been dealing in multiple situations at various organizations right now as it relates to gaslighting, because gaslighting really is a microaggression in itself, but it's a form of psychological manipulation where, you're, in a way, for me, the way it's come across is you're making someone else feel bad or second guess themselves, question themselves in terms of their memory, their perception, their judgment. So, and Shu, where we've seen it lots, it was like, well, I think she did this because of my race, or I think they said this because I'm a woman. And the first person, the response that we've watched is like, no, that's not why they did that at all. No, John would never mean that, and that's the perfect, it seems innocuous, but that is gaslighting 101. It's not even seeking to understand. It's going simply into defensiveness mode, which really lends itself back to fragility.
And so for example, like when you say John, like I've seen it a lot of times where if I've come forward with a complaint against a coworker or something in the past, and the first thing that was said, well, Cindy's such a nice person, or so-and-so such a nice, like the first thing you respond to is by defending their character. And then you go back into like, but I could understand how this makes you feel. So you've already use microaggression and gaslighting, and then is trying to cover it and smooth it over with empathy, which is even more gaslighting and more, now you're just insulting my intelligence. But oftentimes, especially as HR professionals, you in a time where you're trying to split justice or you're trying to stay neutral, because I think that oftentimes happen where you're like, well, I can't professionally say Cindy's awful or Cindy shouldn't have done this, because now you're splitting, you are coming from a biased perspective. So you think you need to talk to Cindy's character. But what you're doing is you are gaslighting the individual who's not necessarily attacking Cindy as a character, what Cindy is, who Cindy is personally, but from Cindy's role. If Cindy's my supervisor, or Cindy's someone that I'm interacting in an organizational relationship, and she's offended in this way where Cindy, did this or she did that, it's first to address what the issue is. Once you start bringing in people's character and start defending people's character as an excuse for their misstep on a contractual duty, is when you really are now gaslighting and really showing microaggression. So I just wanted to bring it back from that perspective, of a work perspective, because sometimes you're like, but how do I, doubt out the fires without offending someone? Well, let's not go and defer back to Cindy's character and saying that I'm attacking Cindy's character, because I'm talking about, or I'm complaining about what Cindy did in the lens of work and how that affects me as an employee. And that's your duty to address that.
Right. All right. Okay, you ready for the question, Shu?
Yes.
All right. So even though there were 30 responses, I will say this, we have kept every question here. There are 17 of them. Now I know, actually, Dave, I'm going to throw this over to you real quick. Was this just scheduled for an hour, or do we have longer than that?
We did schedule it for an hour, and I see we're closing in about 17 minutes left. So that would be about a minute per question, which I'm pretty sure won't work. What we have done in the past, I do know that it looks like there's about 42 people on. If we go past an hour, we'll definitely have to lose some people, and that's totally okay. But if people can stick around for even 10 or so minutes after, that just gives us a little more time.
Awesome.
And we can certainly do that.
Okay. So Shu, you and I are going to have to be quick, not our strength.
Not our strength. You know what? But here's the thing, a conversation like this, like I said, Dave, and you know this, Michelle, there's no way in the world we could go through such in-depth, this is a real valuable, this, and we'll answer this, what I'm saying in some of these questions, but it's just, this is not just this can't just be a one-time thing. This in itself needs a whole series to do, because an hour just not gonna cut it for what we have to do. But we'll try our best in the time that we have.
And then the other thing that, Dave, too, what we were talking about was we'll even give you a written response to each of the questions too, that you can send out in bite-sized pieces, along with resources that we think are great for organizations to kind of access as well. So like I said, we'll do our best to get through these. There were 17 questions. So we'll do our best to get through them and go from there. So. All right. And then we also have other questions probably, right?
While you're going to that slide, I've gotten a few people asking me if they do have to leave, will the recording be up, or can we send it out? So we won't send it out because it's really big, but we will put it on our website under the Insights tab. And all of our past recordings are there as well. So probably by later today or tomorrow, that will be up. Okay,
cool.
Did you have a question, Jillian? Sorry, I saw that you were mouthing something. No.
Oh.
Muted.
Oh. We can't hear you. Okay. All right, so number one was all around, so just as a reminder, the way that this survey was structured was like, what idea, thought, or question, comment do you have around this? So we have just copied and pasted, everything's anonymous, but we have just copied and pasted exactly as it came through, and we didn't make any changes. So this comment was really about overcoming the stigma and educate on the importance and benefits of policies and practices, and in brackets, when you have a we don't have problems, so we don't need to attitude. Shu, you want to kick us off?
Yes, so overcoming the stigma and educating on the importance and benefits of policies and practices when we don't have a problem attitude. That in itself, to me, is the problem. The fact that we don't have a problem issue is the problem, and why we need to, that's why we need to have the benefits of these policies and procedures, because if there is a board or there is people in the organization that is refusing to see the implicit biases and the harm around racial injustice and racial inequality, as an organization that wants to be diverse, that wants to be inclusive, it is important for you to have these policies and procedures in place. It's important that your HR agent or officer has these attitudes and have this lens that they could deal with whoever steps through your door. you know, that like that in itself, and that's why I wanted to start off, that's in itself, if in your mind you have conceived the notion that there is nothing for you to do or work on or to change, or that there's nothing for you to unlearn, that in itself is the problem. It's starting there. The other part of that question, we can't even really too focus, because the big problem in this is we don't have a problem. Right. And once you have told yourself that you don't have a problem, you've left yourself open for all types of problems. So,
yeah. Especially if you're asking the question about stigma in education, around education, that should be your first sign of, if you can say those words out loud, is there's a stigma around the importance and benefits. There's a stigma around policies and practices. Go explore that.
Yeah.
You know, do your journey there first. Why is there a stigma?
Needs to be explored before I can't even, that to me is a rhetoric, the answer is within itself. Yeah. So that has to first be explored.
Yeah. Okay. How do we navigate diversity versus preferential treatment, incorporating cultural values into workplace policy? So very similar, Shu, the way that you did, you answered the first one. This is almost like a two-parter as well. And first and foremost is the fact that you see it as preferential treatment. That's where you need to stop yourself. This is not about preferential treatment. Equity is not about preferential treatment. I look at equity about helping people to access things that because we don't all start at the same space. There's a great graphic that's out there right now. There's three people who are trying to watch this baseball game, for example, and they're all standing on the same box, which is really supposed to show equality, right? But the truth is, as people and individuals, specifically in Canada, we are not all afforded the same privilege. And so as soon as you think of diversity is versus preferential treatment, that's where we have to stop ourselves. Equity is a hand up, not a handout, right? And so now if you start to have a negative lens around it, you're not going to be able to move yourself into that next level then. And as it relates to incorporating cultural values into workplace policies, I mean, one of my favorite policies that we look at often with an anti-oppressive lens is bereavement. It's a recognition that our country is full of many different cultures and many different ways of bereavement. And what that looks like is different. And so how can we as an organization just take something as you know, a death in the family or a death of a friend, and how can we open up our policies and be supportive and at least have that discussion? But no, right now we're told you get 3 days to grieve for your wife, and then other than that, take vacation. You know, and that certainly supports an organization and their bottom line. And I'm not suggesting it's pay either. It doesn't always come down to pay, but it is a level of empathy and understanding. It could be job protected leave for taking the time that's required, you know, things like that. But it's not preferential treatment. It's an empathy. And that's where, go ahead, Shu.
I just wanted to add, just reading over the question, how do we navigate diversity versus preferential treatment? In this lens, what this says to me is that you consider inclusivity and equity as preferably treatment. That when we talk about when we talk about DEI, it's either diverse or you're getting preferential treatment. Mm-hmm. It's one or the other. This is because the word that for me, narrative and verbiage is a very big thing. So diversity versus mm-hmm. preferential treatment. So it's either, you can be, in your mind, it needs to either be diverse or inclusive and equitable. It can't be both. But yet still at the beginning of our conversation, we're looking at diversity, inclusion, and equity. But in this question, it's separating both. Having racialized groups being a part of your organization in all levels, whether it's from at the bottom to upper management, isn't preferential treatment. It is what we should do, because talent, expertise, knowledge does not come attached to a skin color. And we'll go more about that in another question that we have coming up.
Yeah. All right, so ideas for small employers to get this started. Should it be employer run or organizationally driven?
Both. Both. Yeah. I believe because we're looking at it as a organizational, behavior and culture thing, we are forming and we are shaping the organizational behavior and culture. So it has to be organizational driven. Everybody has to be a part of it. There has to be structure, there has to be guidelines, there has to be certain things around it, because we are human beings. So there needs to be some type of structure and ordinance around it, so it can live, so it could go through that lifespan, so it can be sustainable and measurable. But it must be also employer governed, and like everybody has to have a part in it. So it can't be one or the other. You can't just pass down the rule and like, this is what we're gonna do. You do have to interact with your staff and who is, especially the racialized people in your organization, and get their feedback of how they would want to, how would they want their voices to be heard? How would they want this to have, how does this impact their lives and their, how they feel coming to work? But then you have to put that in structure so it can live through the organizational behavior and culture.
For small businesses though too, where budgets are a concern, it really just starts with conversations. We've worked with lots of our organizations that have simply started a book club, and from that perspective, it does matter when you see leadership part of it and leadership wanting to be part of it. But also there's another side to that too, where when leadership is part of those conversations, they have to recognize their positional power and drop that, because in something like this where you're having discussions, that's where hierarchy doesn't exist anymore. And if people can't feel safe enough to share what it is that they're feeling and thinking in those discussions, well, then you're losing all credibility and any traction as well. What I would say too is, from a small organization perspective, not everyone has to participate. And in fact, where you mandate it, like not necessarily like mandate a committee or mandate full participation, it's going to have the exact opposite effect. I believe in drip campaigns. I believe that small groups where you start to see positivity eventually reflects amongst the whole organization. And then as, not just small employers, but as you get into like building committees, then yes, the employer is still paying for the time. The employer is still typically paying for facilitators. So they need to be part of that, and you need to have support. But I often think as a small organization where we struggle at, convincing our leaders that this is still something we need to do, I always say to those people who want to do something, focus on what you can control. You can control about having conversations. You can control about your own individual practices as it relates, and you can control what you do as a bystander. So if you hear something or see something, use your own, and if you are white, you could use your white privilege to actually call some of those behaviors out. Those are all the things that you can do. All right, so the next question. How important is it for the executive level to reflect diversity? How can we recruit more diverse board members be recruited? And what is the top diversity issue in organizations in Calgary? So why don't you kick it off by answering that first question, Shu?
How important is the executive level to reflect on that? Like I said, it kind of goes back into the question you articulated so well and we just talked about. Again, I think this is like a part two. It's extremely important for executive level to reflect on diversity, inclusion, and equity. It's extremely important that everybody that has a part to do with decision making or decision following has a say, or is included into some way of how this looks, especially if we're doing this to create a space for more racialized or marginalized people to enter your organization. It must be open to those individuals to have to participate if they want to. I mean, with rules and levels of different levels of management, you know, it's going to look in a different type of lens, but nobody gets to say, I'm going to step back from this and I don't have anything to say, or I don't have to participate, or I don't have to be a part of this. And it's very important to have a diverse board members, because our board members represent the people that you're serving. So if your board members does not understand from even a lived experience as to what the employers or the employees are feeling, then how are you going to create empathetic answers to create solutions? It's going to become performative. So it's diversity is not a lower management or not a frontline thing. It is a whole overall arching organizational thing. So absolutely, it's important to be everywhere in your organization.
And then how can you, recruit more diverse board members is just looking at your own practices and taking a look at the data that you've got in front of you. Often when we talk about recruiting just in general, we are, it's as simple as are we using the same job board over and over again and getting the same results? Or what are we doing to actually reach out to the different communities? There are a ton of community associations, and there are people that you can look out to. Shu, I'm sure you get a ton of requests around when it comes to recruitment. Do you know anyone with this skill set? And so going beyond just your traditional channels and trying to create relationships in different pockets so that you can start to recruit more. But again, doing the same thing that you've always done isn't going to yield different results at all. And as it relates to what is the top diversity issue in organizations in Calgary, I laugh because at the end of the day, it's the foundations. It's getting to I think that the top diversity issue that we see anyways is getting over your own fragility. Even organizations that Shu and I work with right now, from nonprofits to otherwise, we've got so many well-intentioned CEOs, but the truth is that they are sometimes in their own way as well in terms of understanding what it is that they need to do and how they can do things. And even, again, language choices for me are some of the top choices of just accepting responsibility and accountability for creating these type of environments. That actually is the top diversity issue, but it will often be under the lens of how do we attract, how do we keep, that kind of
thing.
thing.
Into question 6, and I think we're just gonna look at question because we're just not even halfway there. But what we just discussed in 4, I think it really speaks to what question 5 is and what question 6 is. Like all those questions are kind of like a part of each other.
Yeah.
So,
although I'll quickly answer number 5 then, and then we can go back to that, because how do you get your senior leadership team to recognize the importance of this topic and make it a priority? I always get asked, what's the return on investment? Especially when I'm talking to CEOs, why should we bother investing in this? And I always cringe. Because for me, the top issue as it relates to people and culture tends to be about retention, tends to be about, engagement, because we've all seen the studies. A large majority of you are most likely on, in human resources or even leaders of companies, and we all care about engagement. And if you can imagine a world where someone does not bring their whole selves to work, they do not feel like they belong, chances are their productivity, their efficiency is, down the window and down the drain. And so for me, this is about making sure that we've built an environment where everyone can bring their true, authentic selves to work. And if you need a number, McKinsey and Consulting Group did do a study, and they actually led it to those organizations who went all in on their DEI committee work, saw a 19% increase in profitability year over year when the organization was rowing together and trying to make a difference as it related to how people felt at work. So that study, you can just Google McKinsey, and that'll be brought up as well. So
from a marketing, quickly, I just sat here, I thought about it as from a marketing and just perspective with the generation that we're living with right now, or living in the generation, was it generational X or Z? I don't even know. I don't even use those terminologies on a regular basis. However, we know that urban and hip hop culture is infused in almost everything. Every single branding strategy, every single ad you see out here, TV. Who is the top spending target audience and generation is the youth. And the youth is heavily influenced by especially Black culture. So when you have a diverse team where you're coming in and you're getting lived experience from that lens to help build marketing and packages and things that is going to appeal to those who are going to support your business and spend in your business and buy your products, or however ever else you want to look at it. In truth and in fact, like Michelle said, it is quite profitable. It's profitable to be able to move with the times and for your organization to continue develop and be able to speak to the generation at hand. So if you are now excluding what that looks like, you are excluding profitability from your organization to continue grow. So wherever lens you want to look at, it is important to have inclusion and diversity in your organization.
Yeah. All right. So looking at thoughts on attracting a more diverse workforce, and I know you've got a few, and I want to say too, we have read the chats. Amanda, you're making some really great points. You got to reach out, you got to do more, you got to look at different ways. I know for us, we work in an organization that would like to attract more people from the Indigenous community. So one of the things that we've had to do is you can't just go post on an Indeed and say, yep, we're going to get a whole lot from the Indigenous community just by posting on Indeed or LinkedIn. That isn't, first of all, they need to know that you're an environment that is safe for them to apply to as well, that you are understanding. So it starts all the way at the beginning, where you have to look at all of your practices and your policies and make sure that you've got somewhere that a diverse workforce actually wants to come to. But beyond that, I mean, we have gone into different communities and we've created conversations, but it's not about just posting on a job board. It's about building relationships so that people feel safe with us, so that we can attract the type of organization that we want to attract. And it goes beyond the traditional things that we're taught from an HR perspective. Shu, I know you have...
Like for you and you and my relationship, I didn't put out a post and then it was about, everybody could apply. You purposely sought me out. You purposely found my information. You contacted me. You called me. You recognize you had, in order for you to attract a more diverse workforce, you have to be within your community. You have to be seeing first, to start off, who are the people who are working in the community. Who are the people in the community their people are knowing and trusting? Who are the people that stand and speak to your brand equity, who you want to represent who your company is? And once you make a way for those people to be entered into your organization, then they also could be a voice for you to echo out to the larger community. Because quite frankly speaking, you might not know who to go to and who to talk to and who are the best professionals around. But you start off with saying, let me find the individuals who might know, who can be those agents of change, who has been the agents of change within the community and within my city that I live in, or the province that I live in, and engage with them. And then they will want to then engage with the wider community. And that's how that trickle down effect works. So when Michelle finding me and bringing me onto the team, if there is people where I have my ears to the community as a community activist. So if I can now purposely go to someone and say, hey, this is an opportunity, they trust me, they trust that I trust Michelle, and then that's how that level of trust builds, and that's how I'm able to play as a bridge between Michelle and between the wider community. So you could always start there, getting aligned with those who are visible, and then they will be able to amplify the voices of those that are not.
Yeah, that was Awesome. Al has a good point here too about internal mentorship programs to provide equitable opportunities is crucial to avoid tokenism and bring marginalized folks to positions of power. Absolutely. There are, you know, I'm coming at this from a smaller business perspective, but in larger organizations where you can have those mentorship programs, that is great. Again, I think we were answering this as well from attracting, but if they hear that you have these programs, that you have these practices inside, again, that creates the sense of safety.
And be very careful with the word also tokenism, because we also don't want to have this overall arching feeling that because you are Black, because you're Indigenous, you're all of us, you're automatically a token, you're automatically put into this position because because that in itself is diminishing and dismissive. So be careful of how we look at the lens of tokenism. And I really, in my sense, don't even like that word, because even if you are really just putting me in that position because I am Black, but I'm doing an amazing job and I'm doing what I need to do, and I've worked and I'm educated for it, I don't want to be handing over my head that I'm only here because I'm Black. Nobody wants to come to work every day feeling that the only reason why upper management gave me a job is because they want to fulfill their status quo. So we as individual, while we're talking in our verbiage, and I don't think the person who said that meant that, but I just wanted to put to our consciousness how much we use that word, because in itself it is a microaggression using tokenism. Because why is that again a reason why I'm here, and how do you determine when it's token?
Actually too, and I think we were talking about an organization that you were supporting as well, and they did end up hiring several, I think you said several Black people, and you kind of said, you know, like, I get it, like they did choose these people, but you were not opposed to Black livelihood. Like that's the thing, that what you're doing is by promoting this and supporting other organizations as well, is actually helping others to be successful, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So exactly, and that's why I again, like you notice, I'm anti-oppressive to sometimes my own fault, because anything that seems oppressive to me, I'm like, no. And I feel like tokenism is just a word that is just rooted in oppression. Because you know, like, yes, I go into an organization and I see that there's several opportunities where Black people could be hired. For those people to then feel that, oh, I was only hired because of what's happening in the community, and really now have dismissed their talent, has dismissed the opportunity. They are now able to feed themselves and their family. They're now able to earn and to have a livelihood, to me is just so harmful. It doesn't, to me, like, as long as you're able to live, you're able to elevate, you're able to grow in an organization, I don't believe that the word tokenism should be held over anybody's head, that this is the reason why you're getting it. So and like you said, Michelle, like, I am an advocate for Black livelihood, for equal play, for equal opportunities. I want to be in the boards. I want to be considered for CEO. I want to be considered for COO. I do not want to be just someone who is a frontline staff and can never have the dreams and opportunities to move up, it based on my skin color. So yes. That's how I feel about that.
Okay.
Quickly jump in here. We're at about 10 minutes after 11. I think what I'll say is, just judging by some of the comments that I'm getting and the timing, I feel like we could probably do another session on this. We're just barely scratching the surface and so much good stuff. So what I will say is, because we're recording it, we can keep going. But at the same time, if you're on the call and you need to go, please don't feel bad. You can certainly go. And if you want to come back and watch the recording later, you can certainly do that as well. So just Michelle and Shu, you're doing a great job. Just keep going. But for those who need to get going, feel free to sign off.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Okay, so how do we promote this more so that all staff gain and learn from the policy and practices? Shu, you want to take this one?
It's by making it a part of your organizational culture. It is not something that not being oppressive where you're forcing people but you're normalizing it in your organization where you're telling individuals, if you're not open to be inclusive and for to be in an environment that is anti-racist and that is going to be anti-oppressive, then maybe this isn't the organization for you. That is what you want people to think about. Like, for example, one of my businesses, I have 3 businesses, and one of my businesses is called the All Things Bossy brand. And the mandate of All Things Bossy brand is creating luxury event for Black women and Black girls, and for women who support Black women and Black girls. Now, what I'm telling people right then and there is that if, you know, as a Black woman or that was also a Black girl, this platform is for you. It's for you to strive. It's for you to be seen. It's for you to be heard. It's for you to be empowered. And if you are a woman who supports, or man who supports Black women and Black girls, this platform is also for you to partake in. But if you have a problem with me saying that this platform is for, and this space will be kept and held for Black women and Black girls, then that's a you problem. And you don't need to be supporting me or be anywhere near what I'm doing. That is the mandate. So when you're around me, you know exactly what I'm about. There's no questions around it. There's no gray areas. I'm just not a gray area type of person. So that is what your company by allowing and promoting the staff to want to learn and to want to that they learn, it has to stem from the organizational culture, that this is what we're about, and because it's what we're about, you have to want to participate in this as well, to some as the extent goes, you know what I mean? Without being oppressive, because I don't think anything should be forced on anybody. I think things should just go how it goes, and people, if they align with it, they align with it, and if they don't, they don't. That is how things should operate from a organic perspective, and everybody should be respected in their process.
So Shu, we're actually going to just jump ahead a little bit here, because I think some of them have an overlap. So I'm going to ask you this one. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to turn off the presentation, and we're just we're going to end this just from the perspective so that we can have this conversation at the end here. You know, so real quick, how do you ensure that the voices of, and the question here was, how do you ensure that the voices of BIPOC employees, but I think, you know, one of your recommendations is to use, is it to use racialized? Is it to use marginalized? What would you say there? Anyways, the question is, how do you ensure that the voices of BIPOC employees are leading the conversation without putting all the work on their shoulders?
It stems back to the question that we were talking about, who should we have included in the conversation? I think the question in itself is the answer. It's by giving them the voice where they're able, when they feel safe in wanting and knowing that the organization and their leaders are coming to them to be a part of the conversation, and not only to talk about their you know, the issues, but their desired solutions. You don't just want to hear what's going on and how they're feeling and how you could be better, but you also want to hear their desired solutions of what that looks like for pivoting the organizational culture and its overall behavior, and not putting putting all the work on their shoulders, is having that collaborative attitude. I am going to support you from my level of management. What can I do? I'm the one who is in charge of making these policies and procedures. I'm the one who is in charge of hiring these, you know, facilitators to come in and have these conversations. I'm the one who's in charge in giving you the tools and the resources to make it successful. I'm going to do my 80, as I like to call it, my 80-20 rules. I like to have an 80-20. I'm the 80% of the power, so I'm going to do the 80% of the work from the strategic part, but I'm going to give you the 20% where you are able to bring in your problems and bring in the solutions, and we're going to collaborate in making this a change in the overall organization.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to talk about how do we broaden the scope from Black Lives Matter to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in fact, one of the individuals said, you know, I thought all lives matter was a wonderful idea. And then I was embarrassed when it was pointed out that it was inflammatory and offensive. That wasn't my intent. So where do we go with that to say like diversity, equity, and inclusion goes beyond Black Lives Matter? And how do you respond to that, Shu?
Again, that whole one versus the other is the first problematic train of thought. I think when we think of Black Lives Matter and the term Black Lives Matter, we automatically believe that we're talking about the Black Lives Matter organization and the different chapels of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, the organization, is one entity that I can't speak on because I'm not in the organization. The organization is in the United States of America and across the United States, predominantly. The Black Lives Matter slogan or saying is simply just that: Black Lives Matter. It's nothing to go around, it's nothing to overthink, it's nothing to go over. It is simply that. And the reason why Black people and people who understands the plight and the struggle and supports Black people have to say Black Lives Matter, because there is an obvious historical and present situation where Black people are being incarcerated, being killed, being unemployed, being suffering at the hand of the system and the community at large. So because we are constantly treated as if we are not lives and we're not human beings and our lives and livelihood doesn't matter, we have to verbalize and say Black Lives Matter. It isn't to denounce any other life. It isn't to denounce any other existence. It is simply to say, hold on, I know the media and I know the society and I know the systems have been telling you and perpetuating the narrative that we are cargos and we're not human beings, but we're very much so human beings. And we're very much so people with families and talents and hearts and souls, and we matter. That's just what that is. So there's no such thing as diversing or stepping away from Black Lives Matter into inclusion, into diversity. In order, if you want inclusion, diversity, and equity, you do have to believe that Black Lives Matter. It is not one or the other, it is one and the same.
The question here is, how do we evaluate reverse discrimination?
There's no such thing. Let's just start there. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination, or no, there's no such thing as reverse racism. And let me tell you why. The fact that that is even a worse, let's look at it. Let's break it down together, people, right? So we're gonna say, I think you are using reverse racism. You are then in your own conscious and subconscious is acknowledging that racism is done to Black people. You're acknowledging that racism, and I didn't give you guys the definition because I think oftentimes when we think of racism, we think of you just not liking a person because of the color of their skin. Understand that racism is a social economic structure that you must have power, privilege, resources, and options to dismiss, discredit, diminish, kill an individual and get away with it. Whether it's physical, spiritual, financially, it is a license to kill. That's how serious racism is. This is how serious racism is, and this is how detrimental racism is. It is not just something that's to say, oh, I don't like this person because they're white, or I don't like this person because they're Black. It spans way further than that. So to say that, there's such thing as reverse racism, you first don't even understand what racism is. So I don't think there's such thing, so I can't even give you an answer to say how we move away from that.
I'm a little, I'm going to admit, I'm a little heated by a comment that has just come in.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a little bit derogatory. Do you want to read it, Shu?
Oh, I saw it, but I mean, that in itself is, what do you say?
Right.
And I don't, and what I don't like is the word training. Like I said, there's no such thing as you cannot train individuals to be anti-racist. You cannot train individuals to be allies. You can have a conversation and hold a place where people could hear from each other and learn to unlearn. And the problem in itself is when we start attaching to how many years somebody has been doing something and how long, it diminishes and discredits anybody's lived experience. That, oh, you must be a slave for 100 years to talk to me. You must have, you must have a PhD in this to be able to say this. Like that in itself comes from an oppressive and race and a supremacist mindset. So this is the conversation and things that people say on a regular basis, especially when there is a Black woman at the table. It's naturally to discredit Black people. So, you know, it is, that's just where that is with that.
Great example of the stuff we were talking about in terms of microaggressions. The last question here, because I think, you know, at the end of the day, Shu, you've done awesome. You are an amazing person to have on my team. And I am proud of your lived experience to share it, to be able to help you, to give you the platform I think you deserve and what you've done. The last question actually from the audience and from someone anyways that might be here is why can't we celebrate being white in addition to being Black or LGBTQ? And this is not the first time we've seen this question come up. And so what we always come back to when it comes to white pride, we come back down to definitions. And we come down to definitions and where something has come from. And white pride was coined by white supremacists. And it was meant to represent superiority, and it was meant for hate. Whereas when we talk about pride as it relates to Black people, it really came out of the civil rights movement. And it really is, it equates who they are, where they're going, and it equates that the fight for equality in general. And that's why you can't have white pride. You can be proud of where you are from from Scotland, from Germany, that's different. But our color of our skin only perpetuates hate.
Yeah, and and I don't know who, the last individual is, but, this is an example why if I do not leave and hold my head up high as a young Black woman, as an activist, as a professional, it's things like this that will constantly and always be said in spaces that is meant to not only be safe for everybody, but to be uplifting and to leave. If I don't have pride, if I don't have self-worth, if I do not refuse to succumb and to subscribe to tyranny and white supremacy or white passing supremacy, because oftentimes people who say things like this are people who use the lens of, well, I'm not white, but you're also not Black. And you also, the world was not set up for you to be attacked in every sense that you're in. So this is the reason why you have to say things. We have to talk about having pride, because we're constantly put in predicaments to overcome adversity and to persevere and to do it with grace and class. So, I hope that in this conversation and what has happened today, both good and mostly good, and the negative, that we look at it as, why is it so important to continue the work? Why is it so important to constantly reflect and unlearn and learn? Why is it so important to have diversity and inclusion? Why is it so important to talk to not shun voices of Black and Indigenous people? Why is it so important to do that? Because this is where we see it. We see it. It always, racism and hatred and tyranny always rear its head. in every situation that it's able to do. So that's kind of where that is.
Well, like I said, these questions that we've answered today were curated by the people that had signed up for the course. So we did it exactly for them. There are multiple other questions. Like I said, we'll provide you some written documentation for that, Dave. But I would like to thank you. That is the end of our presentation for now. And I'd like to thank you for having us here.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. It's been great. Just the vulnerability and just the openness that you've had. It's been very insightful. I have 100 more questions that I'd like to ask, but it's been very enlightening, especially that part about the terminology that, well, maybe politically correct is still offensive. I just found that incredibly enlightening. I had no idea. So thank you for that. The book that Michelle mentioned, I brought it up on Amazon. It's called White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. I'm buying the book, and if anybody else wants it, just shoot me an email. We'll get you a copy of that as well. It looks like a really good one. A recording of this presentation is going to be up on our website in the next day or so. So look under the Hillcrest website at the Insights tab. So many of you attended our last session on harassment liability for employers in the #MeToo era, where Janelle Butler unpacked this topic from a legal perspective. And we got so much great feedback from that we decided to do a follow-up session on November 19th that, for now at least, we're going to call #MeToo Part 2. And our speaker will be Jane Helbrecht from Acuity Partners in Winnipeg. Many of you will remember Jane from a session that we did in June. If the first session was about from a legal perspective, then #MeToo Part 2 will look at this topic from a decidedly human resource and organizational perspective. We'll share some examples of harassment in the workplace, how these situations were resolved and what can be learned from them. And then we'll explore some of the practical actions organizations can take to ensure that we don't just maintain performance, but that where possible, we intentionally rebuild trust and restore relationships. So please keep an eye on your email for that invitation. But if you'd like to put it as a placeholder, it will be Thursday, November 19th at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So that does bring us to the end of today's session. Thank you again for being here. Thank you so much, Michelle and Shu, for your time today. Really appreciate it. And please do enjoy the rest of your day and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.